Howdy ho everyone, Fleetwood Benez here from Holistic Songwriting. How are you folks doing? I am a little stressed, but I'm good. Just gotta stay zen here. Alright, that's better. Now, I gotta eat something because I am hungry as anything. So you get to watch me eat a banana live on air. How great is that? I haven't really had the chance to. Hey man, hey D Brew. I haven't really had a chance to eat anything today because I've been writing on the new artist series, and I'm a little behind schedule, so I have to put in a lot of extra hours. And I had some Skype coachings today. Hey Anderson the fourth. So it's just a lot of work. It's good, but it's a lot of work. Also, I've made some significant progress with the board game. Significant progress. There's two more little things that I have to solve, and then I think I'm ready for like a proper first prototype. Like I've done a couple of prototypes to test out ideas, and most of them didn't work. The last prototype that I made that already kind of worked. I liked it there, and it would have been ready for playtesting. It just wasn't really that exciting yet. And I think yesterday I had my breakthrough moment of like really figuring out something that I think is really gonna be the thing in the games. It's the big thing that's out there, and I try to make it work. So we are too early. We're not, because in the States everything has shifted 1 hour. Normally it starts 1 hour later. That is true if you consider this as European time, but in the States, where I am not currently, but everything has shifted for 1 hour because of, what is it, summertime, I think. So live stream is offline. Wait, what? I'm still here, right? Okay. So, oh, wait, we totally forgot. Guys, we cannot forget this, possibly. Oh, hey. I'm sorry. This is me. It's a terrible photo I took once. Yeah. So actually we don't really need it, but you know what? I'm just going to jump into the live chat anyways, just because it looks cool and neat, and just because it looks like I put a little bit of work into these live Q&As, which I did at some point, and I'll have to redo this now since this new feature of YouTube allows you to see the live chat anyways. It's 11 p.m. Wait, what? It's so confusing. How would you make an 808? Oh, so right, we're getting into the questions already. All right, so let's start. Anderson the Fourth says, "How would you make an 808 work with phone speakers?" Oh yeah, well, that's something a lot of producers are grinding their teeth on. That's a tough subject, man. I mean, it pretty much comes down to, like, what I've found is what a lot of producers like to do is they kind of distort or add harmonics to the 808 somehow. So distortion is maybe not the right word for it. It's probably more saturation, adding higher harmonics in the frequency spectrum so you can hear that bass a little bit more. So I've seen a number of things that people do. Some people just use like exciters or stuff like that. I've seen people use distortion in very specific spaces, frequency spectra. Like that's what I've seen this guy that I know in Berlin do. And like he has like, so he works in Ableton Live, and he has this whole chain of, what is it called, Overdrive? I think that's like one of the native plugins in Ableton, and he's like this whole series of overdrives, in chain, in his plugin chain, and like all of them are just slightly like bumping some frequencies by distorting them, and that like gives him like this very analog sounding, warm kind of sound, and that makes the 808 to be possible to be heard on little tiny shit speakers. Russia! Waves max bass. Well, max bass is typically, isn't max bass just to like add a lot more lower end to something? I think the issue with smaller speakers is that you can't hear that low end, so max bass is only gonna make that worse. It's not really gonna help you anything at all. So really what you need is something that adds upper harmonics to an otherwise very low centered kind of sound. All right. Tibor Elias says, "Hello, I am going to a producer and I will bring a few tracks to him. My music has no copyright. Is that all right if I trust him, or should I first make the copyright thing?" Well, two things. First of all, you already have copyright on whatever you write. anything you write, anything you write already has a copyright. That's your birthright. Whenever you write something, it's already attached to copyright. There's just certain companies that you can register with that will help you. So like, what's it called? BMI and ASCAP and the PRAs. Is that what it's called in the States? PRAs, right? Public Rights Associations. Is that what it is? It sounds right. Anyways, so those people will help you make sure that you get your money, basically, because whenever your track is being played somewhere, you have these PRAs. That's what it's called. I'm pretty sure. That collect the money for you, essentially, so you get your royalties. So that's what those companies do. And then there's the possibility of actually copywriting your song, and that typically means going to a person of law and locking up your song on a CD or a USB stick or whatever. Other people, other tricks include sending yourself a USB stick and never opening the envelope, so the postal stamp will show you that your song existed at this very point in time. Point is, I did this when I was a teenager, and it's never been a problem for me. I like did that once with my EP, and like after that, I was just like, why did I even do that? Sometimes you're just so paralyzed by fear that someone is gonna steal your precious song that we forget a couple of things. First of all, you probably stole half of what you wrote on that album from someone else. And that's just how music works. We get inspired from other people constantly. And I would be happy if someone got inspired by my music and turned it into something. I was really psyched last time I was on this live Q&A here. I played a little piece that I wrote for guitar, and I showed you guys this chord here, which is like an A minor with a 4, and what's that with a, yeah, it's just an A minor with a 4. So A minor's 11, basically. And someone jumped on and turned this into a song. I think you can find it in the comments under last week's video. And I'm super happy with that. I'm not like, he stole my chord. That's not how this works. It's really not how this works. If you want to have any success in this industry whatsoever, I think having a collaborative sense is important. So don't be like, it's my stuff, it's my songs, no one can hear them, and you're not showing it to anyone until it's done. That's not really how this works. This industry is all about showing people and getting feedback from them. So don't underestimate that, seriously. I know we all like want to wait until our songs are perfect as well and not show them to people until we're really confident that they're ready. But a lot of times we're going to get disappointed when we hear the first feedback of people, and they say like, oh, this sounds really like whatever. And you're like, it does? And you listen to some other song, you're like, oh, wow, it sounds too much like this or whatever. Having feedback from other people is a really good thing. When you're starting out as a songwriter, that may be a different question. In the beginning, you really want to build a little bit of confidence for yourself before you go out there. But once you have developed that confidence in yourself as a songwriter, I think once you have a little bit of a song built, the first thing you should do is like show it to people and say like, hey, what do you think of this? Is this going somewhere? And if not, then you just scrap it, or you really just have to rewrite it. That's kind of how it works. It's kind of like it's a test. You're really testing whether that song is doing something to people, and show it to people who you think it's going to be relevant to. So yeah, really. Coming back to that question, is copyright necessary? Well, some people swear by it. And people are going to tear this to shreds in the comments. I already know. I personally think you really don't need it. Just fuck it. Make music. That's the most important thing, man. Just don't get discouraged by it. First of all, it's very expensive. The whole thing with sending yourself a letter doesn't hold up in court, and you're gonna waste time. You're gonna waste a lot of money. Also this stuff with like what's that other stuff? The non-disclosure agreements, stuff like that. Just forget about all of that, man. It's music. This is not like, I don't know. I mean, people are going to steal your stuff anyways if it's really interesting. So just make sure that your stuff hits bigger, right? If your stuff hits first and bigger, then you have something where you can show people, hey, even if Coldplay steals your song, obviously they're going to score bigger with it, but you can still say, hey, look, this was my idea, right? And there's been plenty of cases where someone, like I think Coldplay was an actual example of this, where they essentially stole a song from a smaller band, and the band didn't sue them. They just said like, hey, we really like Coldplay's music, so we're really honored that they took it from us, and they got a lot of traffic for it, and they grew up because of that. Like they grew really big because of that. Not really big, but they definitely got a lot of fans for that. Otherwise, what would have been the alternative? Well, they would have sued Coldplay, and they would have gotten a lot of hate from Coldplay fans, and they probably, the whole YouTube thing would have been destroyed for them, their whole career. So that's kind of how it is. If someone steals from you, if someone gets inspired by your stuff, be honored. Don't get discouraged or be annoyed by that. Okay. Oh, the RS44 says, no, that's low air. Max bass adds upper harmonics. Oh, cool. I have to check that out again then. Let's see. Have you listened to Trip by Jhené Aiko? I think this is so underrated. I haven't heard Trip yet, but I love Jhené Aiko. I have both of her. Well, I have her album, and I was a big fan of the EPs. I didn't love the album. I thought it was good. I think it was lacking a little bit because her voice alone, she was doing a lot of the same thing on the album, and that was a little bit unfortunate. It was all good, but what I was really loving about the EPs was that she did so many features, and all of those artists brought so many different interesting colors to it, and so it was a really rounded, it felt like a really great artist. She complimented all of these different artists like Drake and Big Sean or whatever. She complimented them all so well that was so great. And then when she did her own album, it had no features whatsoever. It just felt a little bit like, oh yeah, and it's another song that's kind of like this. And she has a really pretty voice. I love her voice. I love the productions as well. It just got a little bit boring after a while. Okay. Thomas Wolf says, as a songwriter, is it good to imitate other pop singers you look up to when writing to find your voice? Absolutely. And not just pop singers or find your voice. Are you talking about really in particular singing, or are you talking about songwriting? Well, in both cases, absolutely. I mean, I've taken so much from bands like the ones that I showed in the Top 50 Inspiring Artists podcast that I released like last month or so. I've taken so much from these bands, and I've learned so much by listening to them and emulating their style. And eventually it's going to turn into your own thing. But anyways, I don't think it's possible to really truly copy another artist unless you're really taking literal melody fragments or rhythms or chord progressions from those artists. I think it's almost impossible to really sound like another artist. Your voice is going to change, the sounds on your guitar, amp, whatever, everything, all the sounds are different, and you bring a different experience, you bring a different background with yourself. So I don't think it's really possible to copy something else. And there's some cases where I've really heard something and I was like, wow, this is just really blatantly copied. This is just really honestly stolen. You know, this is really just someone who took a melody and turned it into another song. And that really annoys me. I'm like, yeah, these guys should be sued because that is not creative work. Whereas, you know, in the advertising business, when you write music for ads or stuff like that, and movies even, they have a thing called temp tracks, meaning entire movies, before they're scored properly, have temp tracks, temporary music under them, meaning this is for test audiences, so test audiences can get a sense of what the film will feel like with proper music, even though it's the music from another movie. And a lot of action movies for a really long time just use Hans Zimmer's score from Interstellar, which meant for a really long time, for like a couple of years, every major movie out of Hollywood sounded like Interstellar, because all of these other artists that were hired to create the music for these films basically had to sound like Interstellar, because the directors usually get used to that sound really quickly. So yeah, and that's kind of the only way to get the job, is if you sound like the temp track. It's a huge deal in the movie industry, and there's a lot of suing back and forth between different composers. And the same thing goes for advertising agencies. You know, they have like their temp tracks under their ads. They're like 30 seconds, and you know, I have heard a lot of stories from colleagues that they got sued because they sounded a little bit too much like the temp track, and so they had to change the music for the final version. There's so much of that stuff. But yeah, otherwise, it's all fine. PRO, that's what it's called. Performing Rights Organization. That's right, of course. Let's see. So absolutely, imitate, just don't steal or don't release anything that you've stolen. That's how I kind of handle it. Sometimes it's fine as an exercise for yourself, or just to like put on YouTube a sort of song saying like, writing a song in, you know, Marilyn Manson style. As an exercise for yourself, that's great, and you can even release it if you say, this is supposed to sound like X. But if you're really, you know, releasing it as your own and saying like, this is completely original, I think that's kind of wrong, don't you think? But I'm sure that's not what we're talking about, and so in that case, I think it's fine. DeBrew says, you have to prove that your music is new and that you are the creator, which is usually very easy to do, since with digital media, it is so easy to show that you've been the first to, you know, played that piece of music, recorded that piece of music. I mean, as I said, like if you share your music with friends and family, then you'll have emails that prove that you sent a certain demo on a certain date, and that email can be downloaded. That attachment can be downloaded, and people can hear the song was already existed at that point in time. So essentially, it's not really something to worry about. And once you release your song, then it's out there in the public record anyways. And if someone else releases later, then it's obvious who had the idea first. Unless, great minds think alike. Both came up with the same idea at the same time. Some more banana. Anderson IV says, how come a lot of the Billboard chart people don't smile in their pictures? Is it because they want to pose like a goddess/god? That's an interesting question. And I must admit, my first reaction to this was like, no, don't be ridiculous. But now that you say it, I think there's something to that. Maybe not like a god in particular, but I think there's just a certain coolness that you have to be in the charts. I think just being this really, warm, sunny guy like Ed Sheeran, it's possible to get into the charts. But since we look up to our musical heroes as, well, our heroes, we want them to be like above everything else, right? We want them to be super cool, relaxed all the time, so we can escape from our, day-to-day stressful lives. And that's, I think, why pop stars in general are portrayed as these super cool, super relaxed dudes who just are the funniest people in showbiz. Yeah, so I mean, Ed Sheeran is kind of the same way in a way that he's also just this really charming, cool, relaxed guy. He's just cool in a different way, right? He's like the family man kind of cool, which is just appeals to a different demographic. But yeah, I think that's probably why. I think there's a certain. Also, I think arrogance is, I think, appears to a lot of people like you have a very strong will, and strong will combined with creativity can sometimes create some really great things. So it might have to do something with that as well. That if we see someone who doesn't smile on their picture, who looks really serious, we think like, oh, he's serious about what he's doing. Like, this is a professional. This is not just someone who does this. Like, Ed Sheeran has a very different vibe to him. Like, if you think about him, like, he's smiling on his pictures. And a lot of his pictures, like when you see him live, he's like just smiling a lot. When you see him, you're thinking like, here's someone who does this just for passion. And then you see someone who's staring into the camera, or he's looking down at you like this. And it gives a sense probably of, and again, I'm guessing here, of this is a professional. This is someone who's serious about what they're doing. This is someone who's serious about their craft, who knows what they're doing. I'm in safe hands here in a way. If I listen to his music, everything's going to be perfectly crafted. This is professionally done. And also, like, you're a little bit afraid of someone like that. He is on a pedestal. If someone looks down on you like that, that puts him on a pedestal, and you're like amazed by how amazing he is. You know what I mean? And Ed Sheeran never feels. He's an amazing songwriter, but he doesn't feel like that. He feels way more approachable. He feels like on the same level as yourself. So it feels like, oh, he's a nice guy that I would hang out in a bar with. Rihanna isn't someone I would like, invite for drinks, like to have a good time with. That's kind of a different story. But I think that's kind of the difference. I think if you have that coldness to your, like to your, in the look, I think that adds, first, it's the coolness. It's arrogance, which paired with creativity, I think has a certain artistry to it. It's being serious about what you do. Yeah, I think that's kind of the direction I think this is going in. What do you guys think? Kai says, versus what? Did you write something else? Versus showing friends and colleagues your music for feedback. When is a good moment to start releasing songs to the world? Should you just go ahead and get out there, and should it be very strategic? I think a lot of beginning musicians make the mistake of releasing too early. I think a lot of people are afraid that they're going to be too old when they release. Uh, they want to stay young. Like a lot of women I know are afraid of getting too old when they release their first single or whatever. For men, sometimes there are just anyone is just a little bit nervous. They just want to get their stuff out there, or we're dissatisfied with what we've written. We want to move on to the next thing, so we release the first one. I think you should be patient with your release. When it's right, that's when you should release it. And right in terms of the content. Like you have to have a song that you're really proud of. And when you have that confidence in yourself and in your song, when you know that you've written something great, I think that's when you should release it. And it doesn't really matter if you release, Christmas or summer or whatever. That doesn't really matter in terms of music. Sometimes you have music that is very targeted towards a certain time. Like maybe you have music that is very feels very warm and it's maybe great for winter, or maybe you have music that feels very tropical, so that's maybe best for summer. But that rarely happens. Like, in pop music, maybe a little bit more. If you if you're a producer first and foremost, sometimes you know how to create a tropical sound. Maybe that's an album that you should wait with to release in summer. But other than that, I don't think it really matters. Some people say you should release right before Christmas so people can buy it during that time. And there's a little bit to that, I think. There's two sides to it. It's a two-edged sword. First of all, sure, people are a little bit, are passionate. They're already buying a lot of stuff, so why not buy your CD as well? But on the other hand side, they have already bought so many albums, or maybe they've already bought so much stuff for Christmas. Why should they buy yours now? They're already way broke. Why should they buy your album now? Or whatever you're releasing. So yeah, I think it's pretty much just release it. Just whenever you think it's right, when you're proud of it, just release it and make sure. I mean, you have to build up to that moment. That's where the strategy comes in. Is you're building up to that release. You're releasing small doses at a time. So maybe a little teaser of the music, of maybe 30 seconds or so. Maybe little videos, a little bit of artwork. Once people start seeing what this whole thing kind of builds up to be, I think once they're, when they're already licking their lips, that's when you should be releasing. But not sooner. So even if you have promised your audience of 15 people on Facebook that you're going to release your song tomorrow, if you haven't built an audience, it doesn't really matter. Just wait a little bit longer, build a little bit of an audience first. I think 100 people would be good for a first song at least. If you have more than that, obviously that's great. But have a little bit of an audience that you can show your stuff to before you release your first song, or you will just waste that release, basically. Tips on writing bass lines. I don't want to just mirror the melody, but I also don't want to go insane like the guy from Iron Maiden. All of his bass lines sound like a galloping horse. Haha. M. Tilla, by the way. Never been on this chat before, I think. Hello, everyone. Grüß dich, Friedemann. Grüße dich, M. Tilla. Do we know each other? Now, bass lines, yes. So I think my major tip on this would be, so first of all, I have a resource on this a little bit in the drum writing master files. There's a little bit on bass writing and how the bass corresponds, interacts with the bass drum of the drum set, which I think is probably my favorite part in the entire course. But also, there's a little bit in the Hook and Melody master files on counterpoint. How counterpoint works today in popular music. So a modern version of counterpoint is explained there a little bit. But then I haven't really talked about writing bass lines, and it's something I get asked about quite often because it is an important thing. It depends on what kind of bass sound you're going for. If it's an electronic bass, typically it's enough if you just have whole notes and the bass is just kind of, if you have that kind of thing going on in the background. Please don't turn that into a meme. That is usually enough. When it comes to something funky, then I think it really helps to learn how to play the bass guitar and learn how to slap and, do all that kind of stuff. And I think there's pretty much almost no way around that. It's really important that when you write a bass line that it just feels right to play as well. I mean, I'm not a great bassist, but I know how to play all that stuff. I have a bass and I know what all of this, how the slapping works and and all of that. And that definitely helps when coming up with a bass line. For like funky stuff, like typically just going in octaves, doing stuff in octaves, like in Blurred Lines, the do de do de do ga do de do, you know, that kind of stuff is great, and slapping that as well. Also sparing the backbeat. So if the backbeat is on 2 and 4, you kind of want to put a rest there. So this is something I explain on the Hook and Melody Master Files as well. But leaving out those backbeats, what is sometimes called syncopation, but I think leaving the backbeat empty there's a little bit more to it as well. Like syncopation is typically just like moving the beat that falls on the backbeat forward by a 16th note or by an 8th note. And I mean a little bit more than that. I think you can just leave it empty as well, so you don't necessarily have to have a beat right before the backbeat. But that's something that always helped me. It's just kind of get into that groove of like really working with a snare drum, you know? Snare drum is kind of what it's about with, because essentially what the backbeat does on the snare is it like accents the light backbeats, right? So because we have like in a standard 4/4 we have the 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, and the heaviest beat in that is the 1 because of the metric stress, and the second heaviest is the 3 because of the, what is that called again? Articulation stress or whatever. It's got a name like that. And then you have 2 that are unstressed, that have no stress on them. So it's 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. And so in terms of like the stress, first is the loudest, third is the second loudest, 2 is the third loudest, and 4 is the fourth loudest. So you got a curve kind of going like this. And the snare drum essentially accents those 2 softer beats, and by doing that, it makes the whole groove seem lighter. So if I make a beat that goes 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, this is how Germans clap to music. It's the worst thing in the world, believe me. I have a hard time doing it actually. If you clap like that, it's very heavy. 1 2 3 4. It feels very stale, super flat. And if you clap on the 2 and 4, 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, all of a sudden the whole thing gets a little bit bouncier, and that's what the snare adds. It adds that bounciness. And if we can portray, or how do you say that? If you can bring forward that snare sound with the bass by leaving it empty or by accenting it, I think that's where you get these really groovy kind of bass lines. And apart from that, I mean, there's so much to talk about with bass, man. It's hard to I mean, there's so many things that come to mind, like counterpoint with the melody is something, but it's a really complicated subject to talk about on a live Q&A. Like I would have to have like a whiteboard behind me and just draw a bunch of things. It's a good question, yeah. Also, like how it works with harmony. I mean, there's so much stuff we could talk about, but I think that's enough for one question. How come Billboard people have no souls? Says Thomas Wolfe. Well, it's because they look so serious on their pictures. Kai says, do you have any advice on choosing between the natural, melodic, and harmonic minor? Well, personally, I just use natural minor all the time, and like, you know, sneak out of it sometimes. Like sometimes do something, like for example, so what I did there is just adding like a major 7, so that's kind of from harmonic minor every once in a while. Thereby, so something like this was like a, I don't know what that was. I don't even know if that wouldn't really be a melody, it wouldn't really be a bass line, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about the harmony. So when I'm singing, I have harmony going on in my head. And so the harmonic major 7 in minor comes just from the underlying harmony. but I'm still in minor. I'm still in natural minor. This is just like when I branch out, it's just because the chords underneath are changing. Really, I don't really, I don't think I've ever written a song in harmonic minor. Like I've used the major seven a lot in minor, or the the third of the dominant chord, whatever you want to call it, and I've used melodic minor, not as much though, not really. That's more of a classical thing. I don't think I've ever used melodic minor in a song. Yeah, I don't think I would. I think I would have trouble making that sound really cool. It's not a very cool scale. Harmonic minor is very cool though. There's some really hip things, especially if you're going like on the, if you go into the fifth step of it, like HM5. Wow, how cool is that? That sounds so Arabian. I love it. So that's something I do sometimes use, especially in soloing, really, not really in melody writing, I must say. Yeah, I don't think I've ever used that. Like I've written a couple of orchestral pieces that used like trumpets, and I wanted like a very oriental sound, so I used scales like that. But I don't think like in terms of real proper like pop or rock songwriting, I don't think I've ever used harmonic minor as like a bass scale for a song. Hebrew says, self-confidence is often seen as arrogance, but smiling is often seen as weakness, so you can never do it right. That is very true, and body language is such a big deal of being a professional in any field, but especially if you're self-employed, it is a really, really big deal how you work with people. Body language really becomes an important factor, and I studied body language for a really long time, and very in depth. Like it was really one of the. It just really fascinated me. Like. You know how fascinated I am by music and music theory and image and marketing, and I was just as fascinated about that, about body language. And it took me a long time to understand that, actually, what you're saying, because I read in body language books, if you want to seem powerful, if you want to have control of everything, don't smile. Smiling is something that seems weak. If you smile too much, and it took me a really long time to figure out that that is true. But you don't always have to be powerful in a conversation, which seems obvious, but it just took me a really long time to figure that out. You don't always have to be powerful in a conversation. There's actually some people that want to retain the power. I've worked with a number of professionals that are really, they have a lot of power in conversations. They're really, I'm almost scared to talk to them because they are so relaxed. They're so cool, and whatever I do with my face and my body language, I just never can reach the level of coolness that they have. I had that with Jeff Rona, for example, in LA. He's just like such a cool guy, and it was just really it was really intimidating almost. Only good experiences, but it was a little bit intimidating for sure. And so in that case, I think would have been better. So what I tried back then was to be equally cool and to cool myself down. That's not the negative part, but I tried to like not smile as much to gain power. And I think what I should have done was, I think there's certain people that like to be in control, and I think I should have let him be in control. I think I should have just accepted the situation and just deal with the situation instead of trying to instead of turning the tables on him, instead of taking control of the situation, instead of making it my own. I should have let him have the control. And so what ultimately happened was I never got the control. That didn't work. I just felt really, I didn't always feel at ease around him because I always felt like I had to do this thing, and it obviously never worked. So yeah, so there's a right place and time for everything. Think about what you want to achieve in a situation. If you have to take control over the situation, then not smiling is great. But if you just want someone to like you, then smiling is a good thing. It really depends on the situation. So you can do it right. You just have to listen to the subtle differences in tone and in the other person. You have to realize what the other person's doing, and you have to kind of figure out what the other person needs right now sometimes, or what you want to portray yourself as. So yeah. I see a big difference concerning arrogance between people who are complete musicians like Ed and people who are only performers like Rihanna. I think Rihanna, I personally think Rihanna is really sweet. She seems really sweet in interviews. Her image on like album covers and in music videos is a very different one, obviously. But she doesn't seem like this really arrogant kind of person. On the contrary, I think in interviews she seems really nice. She seems really sweet. And that's the case with a lot of performers. You know, it's not necessarily like, you know, if you only compare Ed with everyone else, you know, Ed Sheeran is kind of a standout factor in that. And I think he got famous partly because of that, because he's different than what else is out there, you know, in terms of his image. And that was his image. That was what made him so great and popular. But, you know, you could compare someone like Justin Timberlake, I think, who also comes across really arrogant in his videos, but seems to be a really nice guy. You know, I'm saying seems to be because I don't know any of these people personally, but I'm just saying, like, I think people overestimate how what people actually are like. I think a lot of people try to be a little bit through their music videos and on their album covers. They want to make themselves, or their company wants to, their record company wants to make them bigger than they actually are. And so they just don't want like a happy, smiling person on the cover. They just want someone who's like towers above the rest of them, right? It's that kind of image, a god, if you will. You know what was it? Dee Bruce said, I think. No, someone else. It was Thomas Wolfe, I think. So, so I think that's part of it, at least. The Arrow 44 says, I struggle with bass lines too. Heard someone discuss the importance of space/silence in bass lines. Sorry for eating. I'm just really hungry. Yeah, as I said, like there's having these spaces on the backbeats is kind of a cool trick. But then there's a lot of stuff that it just has to feel right. That's ultimately what it comes down to. I saw this video. I don't want to diss on anyone because I know how hard it is to make good YouTube videos. But there was this video. I really don't want to diss on them because I think they're doing really good things, actually. But I think it was, what's their channel? It's not Recording Revolution. Not for sure. It's not that one. But it's called like 7 hacks to writing better bass lines or something. I forgot what they're called. But that video showed how they improved upon a bass line. And I thought like, wow, this bass line is just so busy now. Like I really thought they just made it much worse. I thought the beginning bass line was just fine. But then they just added more and more stuff to it. Like, oh, so you need breaks. So this is now better. And now you have to add, you know, connecting notes between the different pitches. And you're like, and I'm like, just like, this is way too much for just one bass line, you know? So there's a lot of stuff out there, unfortunately, on writing bass lines that I think is too much. I think good bass lines typically are just really, really, really simple. You know, just analyzing Nirvana at the moment, there's some great bass lines in there. It's definitely worth studying. But it's not rocket science. Writing good bass lines, unless you're really like going for that funky stuff, then you really should practice some bass guitar because that's the only way to really learn that, I think. Or be a good pianist, you know, kind of same thing. If you can play a sample bass on your keyboard or your MIDI keyboard, that's just as good. If you understand how the instrument works, that is. Blah, 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 blah. Ahmed says, I want to sing with the mic and the mic stand, no additional instruments, and I don't have a band. I don't want to learn any instruments. Do you think I should learn instruments and production or what? I actually have a production course coming out soon-ish, which will cover just that. So you can basically produce your own music all by yourself in front of your computer, and you don't actually need to be able to play any instruments, because we can do a lot of that. We can simulate a lot of instruments using MIDI, so musical instrument device something. Musical interface device information instrument something. I forgot. So we can use that kind of stuff to emulate an actual live band or live performance. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. I think it's turning out really great. I've been recording this whole month already, and we'll be recording some more next month. It's going to be a long course as well, like an in-depth course on how to use Logic Pro X. So, and yeah, obviously learning instruments is always a great thing as a songwriter. It's kind of your bread and butter. Learning how to play the guitar or the piano. Choose one. I wouldn't try to do both right from the get-go. but learning one of them really learning how to play one of those really well, or at least learning how to play the chords on that instrument is worth so much, because it allows you to really write songs without any external things. You can just actually grab a guitar and just like start playing, and just that's how you write the song. That's how Kurt Cobain wrote his songs, you know. And you don't need anyone else for that. So I think that's really cool, because it allows you to experiment and, you know, try out some stuff. Thomas Wolf says, any advice or tips for succeeding as a songwriter in a big market like LA? The same as in any other market, really, I think. In LA, you just might have to be, I don't want to say aggressive, but yeah, that's why I don't live in a big city, just because I don't like how aggressive people are in bigger cities. It's just a mindset that I have. I don't want to work with people that are really like competitive. I just want to work with people who see the world as I see it, and that is that, you know, if everyone does great work, everyone, like, what's that saying? When the tide comes, all the ships rise, or whatever it's called. That's how I see it. You know, if someone is doing really well in the charts, that's going to help everyone, because, you know, when Nirvana peaked, for example, and this is just because I'm researching Nirvana at the moment, when Nirvana peaked the charts, then rock music had this big surge forward, because all of a sudden everyone listened to rock music, and grunge music was the thing. So that's how I see it. You know, if one band is doing well, why shouldn't I do well as well? You know, if that band attracts a lot of fans, then sooner or later they're going to get bored of that one album that band has released, and they're going to look for other things that are similar to that, and maybe they're going to find me with my band that it just is a little bit different and has its own identity, etc. So so advice, same advice as in any, wherever you live, I think, and that is to focus on creating a fan base. And because whoever has the fans has the power, you know. Don't focus on, you know, landing a record deal or making a lot of money or stuff like that. Focus on having an audience first. If you have the audience, you can turn that into anything, and then you really have freedom once you have the audience. Is what I found with my holistic songwriting channel, at least. Like when that exploded, like that changed my life in such a major way. I don't think money could have done the same thing. I really don't think it could have. So the audience really has opened a lot of doors for me, and it's a fantastic feeling to have people like you out there to support me, you know, and it feels amazing to release a video and get comments on it, you know, because for the first 1.5 years that just didn't happen. I was happy if I got 2 or 3 comments on a video, seriously. So building the audience is really crucial, and you're going to do a lot of free work in the beginning, which is why I don't recommend you quit your job immediately. Just do it on the side, start building your base, and once you have a solid fan base, then it's a fan base that's also willing to buy what you release. Once you have that, then I think you can quit your job. If you have a fan base that is reactive to your stuff, that supports you as well, that likes you as a person, not just whatever you produce, then I think you have a shot at it. But before that, I think it's too early to quit your job. And so focus on fans, not on money or fame even. Like, there's a difference between having fans and being famous. I'm not famous. I'm not even like a B celebrity. I'm just like, no one knows me except for this very niche that I'm in. And that's exactly what I want. I want to be able to walk around. No one knows me. That's exactly how I want it, because I just don't want to be bothered every day. But when I go to certain conventions, or when I show up maybe at a YouTube Live convention or whatever, something like that, then maybe some people recognize me. And if I go to a party with musicians there's always someone there who recognizes me, and that's great. That's perfect, you know. But other than that, I wouldn't really want to be famous. But it's really nice to have fans in my niche. That's a really, really great thing. Hey, camera. How's it going? Let's see. Oh, there's so many more questions, and we only have 12 more minutes. Okay. I'll see if I can go through the next couple ones a little bit quicker. Sorry for the ones that only get a shorter answer like this, but we'll see. Tony Atkinson says, hello, can you talk about the process of analyzing a song from transcribing to picking out details about structure, instrumentation? Well, yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of it is just like driven by whatever. It really is determines, the artist really determines where my analysis goes. So I just like have this system where I just like write down the song and I just write down chords and I write down the melody. And sometimes if I'm like, oh yeah, that's an interesting interval, I'll write down that interval, how it relates to the chord, and or sometimes scale degrees, or I'll note down things like, you know, for example, Smells Like Teen Spirit, main verse. So the solo is basically the melody of the main verse. So stuff like that, certain chord progressions. If I see something popping up every once in a while, I like circle that and say like, hey, this is that same thing that we've seen before. If I check how an artist, like for example, Nirvana uses some out there chords. I check how he approaches that, both in the chords and in the melody. It's that kind of stuff, but it really, the artist determines where it's going to go, because every artist is so different. And I think having like a standardized approach to it would first of all make for a really boring YouTube video. And also it's really boring for me, and also would mean that I think I would be missing out a lot on what makes each artist special. Thomas Wolfe says, Attention by Charlie Puth bass line was written on piano. True. Yeah, and that's a great bass line. M. Tilla says, Tilla says, haha, the clapping in Germany. This is why most artists here sing and rap so static and boring. Yeah, true. It's really embarrassing though, isn't it? I did it as well. Like before I learned, you know, before I studied music, I always clapped on 1 and 3. I just didn't know any better. And now I see, like, I think I saw someone who was like in a movie or something, in a German movie, and he was like pretending to be a jazz singer, and he snapped on 1 and 3. I was like, oh, this is so, it just feels so bad. It feels so wrong. And then I have like having someone go, it's just, it's total cringe. It's the worst. Mtella also says, I like using 808 basses and synth basses in alternating patterns. The 808s more as a rhythmic element and the synth as a harmonic support or even counter melody. I personally don't use counter melodies almost at all. The only counter melody I have is the bass with the melody line. I sometimes have backing vocals where I do a little bit of that, but it's rare. Sometimes for R&B I'll do that. Definitely not in my bass section though. In my basses, I also layer stuff. I don't use them alternatingly. Jesus. But what I will do is like having one 808 bass be like rhythmic, as you said, and the other one being like the basically a sine bass, typically, just to add a little bit more to that whole thing. Sir, your bass beatboxing is on point. Thank you. Well, thank you. Thanks. Any books that you recommend about body language, says Anderson IV. How did I learn about body language? I watched some video programs, but what was that again? It's really, I mean, I read some books as well, but I think the ones that are, my favorite ones were like the video programs that I bought back then. By, what's that guy called? Oh man, I'll try to remember it. Maybe I'll think of it later. But it was, essentially it was like a video series that just focused on body language. Is there any books that I could recommend? There's a lot of books on body language. Oh, a really good book. Here's one that I can absolutely recommend. Let's see. Boom. This is a definite recommendation from me. It's not just body language, it's a lot of things. But this one here, definite killer book, The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox Cabane, right? That's her name. She also wrote a book called Net and the Butterfly, which I'm currently reading. She's great. Really, really love this book. I recommended it to a bunch of people, and everyone loves it. It's one of the most practical books I've ever read on like being likable. It's just so practical. It just tells you literal things that you can do to be more likable in conversations. I think it's great, and maybe that's probably the best answer to that question from earlier. What should I do if I'm in a highly competitive market like LA? Is read this book, because that can really put you above the rest. I love it. I learned so much from it. It's not necessarily so much about body language in here, I think, if I remember it correctly, or maybe I skipped it because I already knew most of that stuff. But it's great, full of great things. Kai says, no, I haven't listened to the new Pink album yet. Sorry, Kai. Camera says, is there a difference between the way we perceive genres and style in Germany and the US? For example, when an artist changes their sound here in America, we are so quick to be like, this isn't Gaga, she doesn't sound like herself. And we lock them in boxes. I think it's the same here. But granted, I don't talk to a lot of my German friends about music, about new releases that come out. About my colleagues, but they're like really in the genre, they're like really in the matter, so they know what they're talking about. And we talk about that stuff all the time, but I don't have like I don't really talk about music with my non-musician friends, I guess, which is something I just realized. Yeah, so I can't really say, but I'm guessing it's the same as in the States. Like, I think we notice that stuff as well. That being said, there's definitely things that fly in the States that really never fly here. Like, the Taylor Swift, Look What You Made Me Do, that kind of stuff is something like that's really foreign to us Germans. It's just an overly cool, almost superficial style of music that doesn't appeal to Germans, I've found. Also stuff like, R&B or like black music doesn't really, doesn't fly for some reason in Germany. It's not because of racism, I don't think. I hope not. My girlfriend loves it. Yeah, it's like, I don't know a lot of people who love black music. I love it as well, but it's not in the charts a lot. I don't know why that is. There's a couple of certain genres that don't really fly here for some reason. Like typically, I find like German music a little bit more standard, a little bit simpler in terms of the music. I think we're a very, very lyric-driven country because we're the poets and thinkers here in Germany. So everything has to be really poetic. And, but I think the problem with that is that we think we're poetic thinkers and we aren't necessarily. So a lot of the lyrics that we have here are really a little bit pretentious. And that's why I kind of don't like German music, is because a lot of German music is just a little bit pretentious. And there is some really great stuff out there as well. Like, I think there's some amazing, like some of the best lyricists I know are German as well. But it's just few of them, and they're not necessarily the popular ones. So we have a lot of songs that are just about life and love and light, and I'm just like all these great hollow nothingness words that just don't mean really anything, and it's just ugh. So that's my opinion in a nutshell on the German market. Ray Harmony and Hack Music Theory, that's it. They've got some great advice, and yet often their finished product sounds not so good to me. Yeah. So, I mean, they're doing a great job. Their videos look really professional. From a songwriting standpoint, and obviously you can disagree with me on this. This is just my personal opinion on this, and I would still do a collab with them if they asked me, because I think, as I said, they're making good stuff out there. But I had the same experience. I felt like at the end of the video, I was like, this sounds so like 10 times worse than it did in the beginning. And the tips like didn't sound wrong. Like they sound fine. There were some of them that I was like, well, this doesn't, is that true? Is that really a thing in bass writing? And then they do it. I'm like, yeah, so it doesn't work. So yeah, why are you telling me that as a rule? So yeah, I don't know. As I said, I really don't mean to diss, and I'm sure they're great people. And they're really, as we all are, we're trying to figure out how this thing works, and it's not easy. It's just, I'm like, yeah, if you're teaching something to people, then you should be really aware of what you're teaching them, I think. So I really check and double check single thing that I'm teaching to people. And there's so many things where I go into a project where I'm, creating a course, and I'm thinking like, oh, I have this thing that I do all the time. That's great. I'm going to tell this as a technique. And then I go through it. I like analyze a couple of pop songs, and I'll be like, you know what? None of these pop songs actually do that. And if I do it on a song, it usually doesn't fly that well. And so I have to take a lot of these techniques out of my courses, just because I want to make sure that everything I teach is relevant and that it does apply to the modern market. Fetty Music says, what do you think of Norah Jones? I'd love to hear one of your album analyses on her. My favorite album is A Little Broken Hearts, produced by Danger Mouse. I like Norah Jones. I must say I don't know that much of her. You know, Fly Away With Me, Come Away With Me, is that what it's called? And a bunch of her like more jazzier songs, but I don't really know a lot of songs by her, so maybe that would be an interesting analysis. Thomas says, MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So it was something with instrument, it was something musical, and digital was in there, and interface was in there. So I had it kind of, but like in the wrong order. What was your name again? The one with the Cyrillic letters? He says, what do you think about Anti? Or Anti? By Rihanna. I think it's her best album. I really love that album. I think it's a really interesting experimental record that didn't sell a lot of copies, which doesn't surprise me. She's really shooting for a niche market. I really, really like it. There's a, what's that song? I think it was one of the singles as well. It's like some Spanish word. What was it again? Rihanna singles. Nope. Man, what is it called? Oh man, there was a movie by the same name. Desperado? Is that what it's called? Desperado. That's it, right? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, from Anti. Right, that's right. Desperado. There we go. Thanks, guys. I should have just looked into the live chat. Good. Yeah, I really love that song. I think it's so interesting. The rhythm of it is just really cool. The melody, I just really, really love it. Yeah, so I really dig it, for sure. Camera says, it's definitely not for racism. I'm mixed and I don't like the black music. Oh, well, you know, different strokes for different folks. Yeah, Mtilla says, in Germany, most people do not understand the art and simplicity and groove, sadly. Hard market for black music, R&B, etc., but the audience is growing. Definitely very true. Also, at the moment, there's like this really, we don't listen to a lot of English music, English lyrics at the moment, like we used to. Like in the 90s, like the charts were full of English music. Right now, it's all German stuff. And I'm just not a big fan of that. But yeah, definitely very true. Like groove is something that's really lost on us Germans. And I think that's probably my biggest issue with them. It's just like all of it is just really like, it's just like that. Even the rock songs are just like a little bit too, yeah, AC/DC is like that as well. It's just all very heavy kind of rock music. And so we would never have a band like Fall Out Boy or Justin Timberlake. Just that, something like that really doesn't kind of happen in Germany. We have people who try to copy that, like Mark Forster, who's a little bit like a German Justin Timberlake. It's just not as good. But I mean, you know, putting aside that Justin Timberlake has 10 times the budget than Mark Forster has, you know, I mean, let's put all of that aside. All right. Last question. Shuck says, hey man, how are ya? I'm good. Was wondering about how to organize lyrics. Like with so many ideas, how do you categorize them not to get mixed up? Oh, gotcha. So there's two answers I have for this. If you're talking about organizing one lyric, I recommend the Lyric Canvas, which is one of my free products on my site. So if you just go to the link in the description, you can find it there. Lyric Canvas is really great to like just have an overview, get an overview of your lyrics. And then in terms of like organizing ideas, I just have a text file on my cell phone where just whenever I get a new idea, I'll just write it in there. And when I'm looking for an idea, I just like scroll through until I find one that fits the song that I'm actually writing right now. Okay, cool, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I have to go now, and I still don't get to rest. I have... It's a busy day. I don't even know if I should have done this because I'm a little bit, just a little bit, I feel a little bit dazed today, a little confused. But I think this turned out okay. Hopefully you guys liked it a little bit and I could help you out with some of the things that I said. Anyways, so glad to have done this and see you guys next week at the same time. Take care.